So today I think we're really fortunate to have one of our own, Jason Power, presenting. He's obviously an expert in his field when it comes to injury prevention and performance enhancement. He's worked in a couple of programs with me, with the state under-20s program, and obviously with our WSBL group. And he's done a lot with our juniors as well. And I'm sure he'll go over it, but he's involved heavily in other sports at fairly high levels as well. So we're really, really excited to have Jason here. He is WolfPack 1 today. Doesn't look like Jason Power, but that's okay. And I'll give you the floor, Jase. I'll unmute you and you're ready to rock and roll.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Nixie. G'day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So this week's been a really interesting week for me, doing my first ever YouTube video editing project for the SBL girls, trying to put together some high-intensity interval training stuff for them to do in lockdown. So that was fun. And then trying to do this talk on a PowerPoint presentation for the first ever PowerPoint I've done. So that was a little bit fun too. So bear with me if there's any technical glitches, and just let me know if you, if you can't hear, can't understand. I assume Nixie will be watching the comments and questions, so just fire away. So yeah, most faces I know, most of you I've chatted to before. I've really enjoyed the coaching seminar, so it's a good feeling to be able to give something back. And originally what I was going to talk about was just going through the reason that we as coaches really need to actually think of injury prevention and performance enhancement as part of the job. And I was going to take you through like all the reasons I think it's important and try and convince you of it. But as I went on, basically decided that everything we've learnt so far just in these sessions, but also in other coaching development stuff we've done, it's already been told to us that it should be part of our job. So that's how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to approach it from the point of view of, listen, we all have had challenges doing warm-ups in the past. And in general, coaches across all sports aren't huge fans of warm-ups for reasons that most coaches share. So I want to kind of take us through a process of addressing challenges that come up in coaching, because that's what we do all the time. So I'm going to get started on the slideshow. I'll just see if I can get this going. Slideshow. From beginning and share screen. So can everyone see that?
Yeah, brilliant. Good work, Jase.
Yep.
Yep.
Wicked technology, and I'll just make it so I can see everyone too. All right. So, just introducing myself a bit more. So letting you know a bit more about me. Obviously, I'm a physio. I've been a physio for 23 years. I started off in actually working at PMH at the Children's Hospital, and always thought I'd be a paediatric physio. But after a couple of years there, went country, which is where I grew up, and did some work in the country before coming back and getting into private practice. And basically, I've found I've loved all the parts of my job that don't involve paperwork. And as I've got into coaching, I've found it's really similar to my day-to-day as well. It's basically just helping people, guiding them to help themselves get better. So I've been really lucky to be involved with the state under 12 footy team since WA entered the comp about 11 years ago. So I've travelled away and been involved in selections with that for a long time. Also been fortunate to travel with a few state basketball squads. Actually met Seba on one of those 5 or 6 years ago. He was managing the under-20s, and Mike Ellis was coaching that. And as Nixie said, I've been away with him this year with the state 20 men's, and as of the start of this year, end of last year, we became the partners for the Wolves, so involved with the men and the women there, and own and run my own private practice in Kingsley, which is a community-based practice, pretty heavily involved with local schools and that sort of stuff. As many of you would know, I also coach at the club. I've been coaching domestically for about 10 years, WABL for 3 years, and I coached footy and soccer before that, even though I've never played a game of soccer in my life. And that's actually where a lot of this information came from, was through my involvement in soccer, because I hate to say it, but soccer got the ball rolling on this sort of stuff before any other sport. So the name of the talk is Injury Prevention and Performance Enhancement, part of the job. As I said, I changed it from part of the job to, it's definitely part of the job, and we need to get better at what we do. All right. You'll see in the early slides, I was really enjoying the animation of text, and then I got really rushed, and it's all just very, g'day Caleb. Caleb's back from training. And it's all very boring. So as we go through this, I'm really keen to hear what everyone thinks from all levels. So from like really young juniors all the way through to Nixie, you with the WSBL women and your experience with teams over the years. But in general, so I've been a coach. I know why I didn't like them, why I watched some of them and I don't like them. So I thought I'd go through what I think, and then I'm going to throw it over to you guys just to see if I've missed anything. All right. And you might actually tell me you actually love warm-ups. It's your favorite part of training, but I doubt it. Okay. So what we've got is time constraints. And I think this is probably the biggest one. And it's the one that, definitely inspired me to start making sport-specific warm-ups. Because in general, the old style warm-ups felt like a waste of time. You're wasting what limited time you have, where you're there to make your athletes better, and you're doing stupid stuff trying to stop them getting hurt, and you're not even sure that happens. Another big one, I think, is that we sometimes feel it's outside our knowledge base. Like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. So, guys, warm yourselves up and then get onto court and we'll train. We always get this, but we get this with all sorts of training, and that's that athletes, and again, at higher levels, it's not so much of an issue with most athletes, but definitely in junior ranks, athletes being non-compliant, complaining, not focusing on something that they might think is not as much fun. And another big thing is not perceiving the pathway from understanding that an appropriate warm-up is actually an ingredient to success in the long run. All right. And that is, there aren't a lot of coaches who, when pressed early, will rate their warm-ups or their injury prevention programs or their performance enhancement exercises as keys to their long-term success during a season. All right. It's just not spoken about a lot. Although watching the Last Dance with, the Michael Jordan documentary, I'm sure most of you have seen that, was really, really interested to see a fair amount of time dedicated to what he did when he got injured, and then his strength and conditioning and injury prevention guy getting a lot of time. And I watched another interview on YouTube after that, just talking about his whole approach to managing Michael was to stop him getting injured and keep him on the court, which I think we would all agree is a fairly big key to the success that the Bulls had over the years. Warm-ups are boring for all involved, including coaches sometimes. And of course, we're always worried about what others think about what we're doing. All right. We often will take things that we think look really good, look really effective. And if we're changing something that is very different to what's been done for many years, and those around us aren't doing it, then that can be a challenge. And as someone, when I started coaching WABL, that was a concern for me. Like, I came into coaching WABL, first year of WABL coaching, and I'd been doing this sort of stuff with my domestic players, and obviously with the state footy team and all of that sort of stuff. But even still, coming into new ranks of experienced coaches, there is a concern that, I don't want them to think I'm a smart ass. I don't want them to think I know too much. All of that sort of thing, and it's a valid thing that most people will experience at some stage or another. So, anyone else out there have any other ideas about why perhaps as a group, coaches, and again, across all sports, this isn't just the Wolves, this isn't just basketball, it's across most community-based sport. Any other reasons you think that we might not approach warm-ups in the same way as we approach other things?
So what I might do, Jase, is just unmute everyone in about 5 seconds, and then if you feel like,
cool,
open up. So everyone's unmuted that wants to be unmuted. So was there anyone that had any other thoughts?
No, I'm assuming I've got everyone on screen.
Yeah, you've got everyone there.
Would most of you agree with those things, that those things have passed your mind at times? Yeah?
Yep.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So then what we're going to do is actually come back to that. So again, I was going to go through and say, well, yeah, this is the concern, and here's the...
Ooh.
Is just bring it back to everyone and say, well, how can you approach those concerns? So instead of just having the concern, what is the process of getting past the hurdle? All right. We always talk with our athletes about being process driven. Follow the process. It's not about the result. It's about the process that you follow. I think from listening to all the coaches that have spoken so far, the consistent message across all of them is it's about the process. All right. The way you get better as a player is to follow the process of having this growth mindset, being prepared to confront challenges, to evaluate yourself, and then make the necessary changes, put the work in. And that's how I think we should approach this problem as well. So in general, in order to understand the importance, I think we need to talk about the cost of injury. So we need to talk about the cost of not addressing injury prevention strategies appropriately, both as individual coaches, but also as clubs, as a sport, and as society. So I've basically broken it down into three areas: personal cost, the cost to a team or to the club, and then the cost to society, which we won't get into too greatly. So personal impact of injury, I've basically broken down physical costs. So obviously, put your hand up if you've had an injury or are carrying an injury or have had surgery or nasty injury. So we've all been there. It's a part of human existence, right? So pain's not fun. Disability's not fun. So I ruptured my Achilles about 5 years ago in my return to basketball. And I think the most painful thing, the thing that got me the most, was my inability to walk normally. Like, it just felt I had no strength. And it was never going to come back. And 6 months later, I'd be walking and the family would be going too fast for me to walk without a limp, and it'd get me down. So it's the impact of the injuries on everyday life that really start to mount up. And of course, diminished athletic capacity. Your athletes are injured, they can't perform. They're either on the bench or they're not as fast or they're not as strong or those sorts of things. Now you'll see after this, I actually go through a few case studies of athletes from our club. What all of them have said, and certainly my experience in dealing with injuries that see athletes on the sideline, is it's the mental health cost that's actually tends to be felt the most. It tends to cause the most suffering. And we see depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and all of those things lead to a strain on personal relationships throughout their life, whether that's at work, at home, friends, teammates, coaches, all of that sort of stuff. Obviously, there's a financial cost, okay? Sometimes when you're injured, you can't work for a while, okay? You're at home after surgery. You can't do the same sort of work that you once did. For our athletes who are professional athletes, if they can't play, they're not, so hopefully their contract covers them for while they're injured, but they then aren't in the limelight. So for top tier athletes, Derrick Rose, you know, that time out of the game where they would otherwise be building their profile and their marketability costs them millions of dollars. And of course, there's the cost of, for us, there's the cost of healthcare. So surgery, physio, aids, braces, that sort of thing. The big one I tend to focus on though are opportunity costs. So opportunity costs are just the things that you miss out on that you would otherwise be able to do if it weren't for this injury that happened. Okay, so there are lost educational opportunities. You know, if our juniors are injured and have to have surgery, they're not at school for a while. All right, and if they are at school, they're not quite as focused as they otherwise would be. We have diminished vocational progression. So again, you miss out on that promotion or the ability to do that course that you would have done because you're at home. Now, from a coach's point of view, the one I really want us to focus on is this one, which is our diminished capacity for personal development. So when someone's injured, it's not just that they're not at your training session for 2 weeks, all right? That they're not just playing for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. It's that they're not on the court training. They're not on court getting the experience of developing game sense, of practicing the skills that you want them to practice. And these are very real costs that over the course of an athlete's development can cause significant lags in their development compared to someone else who hasn't had injury. This again, in the case studies we're about to see, this was actually one of Shani's big thing that she spoke about. And we'll talk about that because she's up next. So this is Shani Colwell, who is our women's SBL captain. And she managed to completely dislocate her knee. And that's her dislocating her knee in the photo to the left as a 15-year-old. As an underage player representing her state. Now, she dislocated her knee, ruptured her ACL, tore her meniscus, had to have surgery. And then at a time in her career where she would have been, you know, really pushing ahead, she couldn't because she had to do a rehab. She had to have a year out of the sport, all of those sorts of things. And then she told the story of how basically every 2 years from then on, for 8 years, she had a surgery every 2 years on that knee. Every surgery was then followed by time away from the sport, rehab, the emotional draining, the mental health impacts of doing that. And just hearing this story, I'm amazed at the resilience and the perseverance and where she's got to. But again, if we talk about these injuries as being preventable, if we talk about these surgeries as being avoidable, we would have to ask, well, where would she be if not for them? Now, she's really just got an awesome outlook, which a lot of people do after kind of triumphing through adversity, which is she's the person she is because she's done this, because she's had to fight through all of these. I have the impression that fighting through adversity doesn't make you different. It just shows what you are. Okay. So I think she would be the same person. She just wouldn't have had to go through all that hell that she went through. So that's Shani. Now, obviously that's around the time I started coaching at the club, was when she was finishing her surgery. Now, this is someone who was around the club as I started off as a domestic coach. So Dan Vlahoff, just breaking into the SBL team. So this was him playing an SBL game just before, with an innocuous movement. So something he does hundreds of thousands of times every year. No contact. He just planted his foot and his knee gave way, and he completely ruptured his ACL, tore his meniscus in 2018, and he underwent surgery. Now that's a subject for a whole nother talk, in terms of the rate of ACL surgery in Australia compared to other nations, and the evidence that now shows that a lot of people who have ACL surgery possibly don't need it and would cope well without it and still be able to return to sport. But he had surgery, had everything repaired. 10 months later, after doing his rehab, this was before I was looking after him, he had returned to on-court stuff, wasn't playing yet. And again, just at training, non-contact drill, but competitive stuff, planted his foot, his knee gave way, and he just tweaked it. He hurt it the first time, and then a couple of weeks later, he was back training again. Similar sort of incident, and this time completely ruptured his graft, tore his other ACL, and was, I don't know if he was booked in for surgery when I spoke to him. So he was an assistant coach for my middle son's team. So I'd got to know him, really liked him, and I sort of approached him and said, listen, mate, I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't just get you to come and have an appointment with this specialist physio who will talk to you about the evidence that's out there that possibly you should do something else, at least try something else before you go for surgery. So best case evidence is, or clinical guidelines for best management are, you should do 3 months of prehab beforehand. And 50% of people after doing that no longer have the symptoms that would say they need ACL surgery. So Dan did that, and at no time has he looked like he needs surgery. And prior to COVID lockdown, he was back on court and doing 3-on-3 stuff and looking as if he would at least this year be back playing D-League. Okay. Now, what I would say to you is the reason he's doing that is because he's doing all the warm-up stuff that I'm going to suggest we all do. All right. He is doing exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing with our athletes. Okay. And what it does is it shows you the power of, if you do the right sort of training, you can play basketball at an extremely high level without an ACL. All right. So it doesn't just prevent injury. It enables you to function without what we used to think was an essential ligament to stability of the knee. Okay. So that's Dan. And then another one of my favorites, Amy Kidner. So you're not supposed to have favorites, but I'm a fan of the Wolves too. And Amy was one of my favorites. She's a beast, strong, competitive. And then, of course, last year she did her ACL, just doing a post move. Her foot was a little trapped. So this is the sort of injury where it's up in the air, whether an appropriate neuromuscular injury prevention program would have been able to prevent it. Okay. When there's contact, so if someone falls on your knee, sometimes there's not a lot you can do. You're going to get injured. But what we see are just an abundance of non-contact injuries in sport. everyone's seen Nick Nat's 2 ACL injuries. Both of them were him just landing on the ground. Like, there was nothing particularly traumatic about anything that he did. He landed on the ground, his neuromuscular system failed, and his ACL ruptured each time. Okay? They're the injuries that we think we can prevent up to half of. And then Connor Smith. Everyone know Connor? So Connor was, now I'm trying to remember which state program he was in this year, but again, up and coming WolfPack dude who has grown quite a bit recently. Now, he is someone I had spoken to prior to this injury about the importance of neuromuscular injury prevention. But Connor was a 16-year-old boy, and they're immortal. They think they're immortal, all right? And at that time, in all of his years of basketball, he had yet to have instilled in him this self-efficacy of, if I want to be the best basketballer I can be, I need to be able to stay on the court all the time. I need to not get injured. These are the things that are required of me if I want to be the best I can be. And unfortunately, he was on a fast break, innocuous landing again, and completely ruptured his ACL, posterolateral corner, and a meniscus. So again, these are the injuries we see. Extremely unstable. And he came in and was assessed by colleagues of mine who identified the posterolateral corner. At that time, our feeling was, we're not really sure that the evidence says that if you've done your posterolateral corner, which is this other thing that stabilizes the knee, that you can manage without surgery. So I have friends who are orthopedic surgeons. We spoke to this surgeon. He said, nah, he needs surgery. And he went in and got surgery. And I watched it. It was huge. It was a lot of work. As you can see from the scars on his leg, he's had a really long road back so far. He's missed out on the state program. I imagine, and I don't know, but I imagine he'd be training with the SBL men this year if he hadn't been injured. So they're the opportunities that he's missing as a result of this injury that I think we could prevent up to half of. All right. So I've just shown you 4 athletes who should be familiar to us. Now I've treated a few more WABL players one young guy who did his in trials. Now I believe we can prevent half of these. These are, there's 4 athletes there. 2 of them, we could prevent those injuries from occurring, and we could prevent the costs that have been sort of borne by those athletes. All right. The other thing that's really important to know is once you've had one of these, that's the primary risk of having another one. So there you go. So cost of injuries to teams. So huge things are diminished ability to train. And again, this comes down to development. Like, we want to develop our athletes more than anything. So if someone's injured, they can't train at the level or the duration or the frequency that they could otherwise. So they miss out on those skill and athletic development. So the things that Nixie spoke about, what are we trying to develop in our athletes? Speed, agility, fundamental skills, all of those sorts of things. And in addition, it costs the rest of the team, because without that player, whether they're a key player, whether they're a role player, your team concepts have to change. There are less competition for roles on your team. So as a result, without that competition for roles, without that driving force in your training sessions, athletes won't be pushed to progress as much. Definitely when you're injured yourself, there's less motivation to actually train. If you're sore, if you're carrying an injury, it's harder to do the things that are asked of you. And definitely what I've seen in teams where there are players carrying injuries is it pervades across the team as well. So it's not just the injured athlete. If there are several carrying injuries, the mood certainly isn't as lifted and energetic. And we were really unlucky in the state 20s that Nixie coached, and Fraser was there too. Just some, like, I've never seen a team with so many injuries, and a lot of them didn't happen in the state team. There were a couple. One guy fell off a scooter and broke his wrist. Another guy fell on his hand doing SBL training. Like, all of these things happen, and they don't have to happen in your team. They might happen playing footy. They might happen, just running around on a Friday night. But if we help them to develop their neuromuscular control, they're less likely to happen everywhere, not just when we train them or play them. Another huge thing is athletes lose confidence in their ability to move and undertake tasks when they get injured. That's one of the key roles in why having an injury predicts another one, is because people will go back to playing sport before adequately testing themselves and adequately developing their confidence. And as a result, their brain controls their body differently. All right. Who's had back pain? Anyone here? I have. Yeah. So everyone knows the feeling of tightness you get in your back. That's just a protective response of your brain going, shit, don't hurt yourself anymore. Change your behavior because we're worried about you. All right. That happens in any sort of injury. And part of rehabbing athletes is getting them confident in using their body again. Okay, and this is a big one. And again, I'm going to open this up to test all your sports trivia knowledge. But essentially, it leads to diminished success, however you measure it. All right. If you have injured players, you'll have less success in your team. So there's research evidence across multiple professional sports about the correlation between low injury rates and improved success. And in general, the research talks about success in terms of number of wins and losses, traveling to finals and playoffs and that sort of thing. So what I want you to do is see who amongst you can think of a team you followed who you think has been robbed of a chance of success because of injuries to key players, or just key players who've been injured that have just derailed a season. All right. So if you can open it up, Nixie, see what people have got.
Yeah, I'll just open it up now. Obviously, the one that comes to mind, there's two, is the SBL team from last year, where we were 3 games clear on top of the ladder. And then obviously one was an injury, but couldn't play anymore. And then Amy did her knee as well. So we lost a major post presence, and that definitely impacted where we finished. And then probably you've mentioned the state under 20s team as well, having, a really interrupted preparation due to injuries, as well as on the eve of the tournament, losing one of our best posts and probably our most consistent performer throughout the whole trial process. So massive impacts for my teams.
Anyone else got any?
We had a under 12s wobble team about 3 years ago, first semi-final down at Bendat, and 3 days prior, one of our starting 5 broke her finger. So she turned up to the game in a cast, and that just derailed the rest of the team.
Yeah.
Not only did the player miss out, but the rest of the team just looked and went, hold on a second, she's our this, she's our that. She usually starts. The whole team dynamic fell apart, and we ended up losing the game and missing the grand final.
Yeah. So that's the flow-on effect.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's go. All right. So societal costs, like, all you need to understand is sports injuries cost a heck of a lot of money and a heck of a lot of opportunity cost in terms of lost work days, lost productivity, lost development, all of that sort of thing. And I guess the best evidence of the cost to society is how heavily these injury prevention programs are now going to be pushed. And we'll talk about a few of them later on. But really, they've been known for a very long time. It just takes time for research to get translated into practice in the real world. But yeah, you'll hear a lot more about the programs that I'll talk about later in coming years. All right. So contributing factors to sports injuries. So this is just a little table that I copied out. The thing we can most affect as coaches are the internal risk factors. All right. Now, obviously, we can't change our age or our gender, but those things are contributing factors. You know, the girls are particularly susceptible to more injuries than guys. All right. I was messaging Nixie about Amy today, and I'm a lot more hesitant to send Amy back to play than I will be to send Dan back to play, partly because Dan doesn't even have an ACL, but Connor, or even a guy the same age as Amy at the same level, because of the altered body shape. Like, women have bigger pelvises and they have different angles at their knees and all of these sorts of things that contribute to higher risk of knee injuries, right? We can't change those. But the other stuff, we can change, all right? And we regularly do. Whether you know that you're doing it or not, you change these things as you coach, all right? So things like fitness of players, things like their confidence in their own body, their skill level at their tasks that they are asked to do on the court. You impact all of them, all right? Now, I would put another risk factor in the internal risk factors, which is a thing called self-efficacy, the athlete's ability to look after themselves, their ability to drive themselves to do the things required to prepare themselves for their sport and recover afterwards, and to put the work into training that they need to put in. Now, these external factors, we have a little bit of ability to make sure we play on safe courts, that sort of thing. And the inciting event, again, we can influence it slightly in terms of managing the load we put on athletes, but more often than not, the injuries we don't have a lot of chance of preventing are the ones that happened to this under-20 team. Like they were falls caused by slipping as he dunked on a ring. That was one of the guys. Another guy fell off a scooter. One guy hurt his ankle coming down for a rebound and landing on someone's foot. Actually, two guys did that. They're the things we can't really change, all right? But injuries that happen in the absence of other people being around, so muscle tears, joint sprains, those terrible knees that you saw, all of those things, we have a very real ability to change. And one of the best things we can do is actually make it part of our curriculum that we teach our kids about. So just talking about our the intrinsic factors, all right? So just have a quick read of those things. So have a think about your own injuries as well. When did they happen? What was going on in your life? If you were playing sport, what stage of the game was it? All right. How much training had you been doing? How much preparation for that game situation had you done? All of those sorts of things. Now, these are the things that we really are looking to change. Okay, with an appropriate injury prevention performance enhancement program. So what I've done is come up with Jase's big three. I like simplifying things as much as possible. All right, because often part of the reason we don't do this sort of stuff well is because we think it's way more complicated than it really is. I mean, you can break it down and make it extremely complicated. As you can with any skill that you teach a kid. You can go into the biomechanics of your shooting stroke and what sequence should you go through and all of that sort of stuff. Or you can inspire a kid to practice a lot, all right? And I know which one of those things is more important, okay? It's the same with this. So the big three that we can change as coaches are unaccustomed load, repetitive load, and inadequate preparation for the load that's going to be put on them. Okay? So load is key, and load isn't just exercise load. So again, this is something that research is showing more and more, that injuries are much more likely to happen in times of stress, in times of emotional turmoil, because the brain isn't working at its optimal level, okay? If you have inadequate sleep, you're much more likely to get injured. The other thing that I think definitely our WABL coaches need to be aware of is there's increasing evidence that as we specialize in sports at a younger age, what we're doing is we're getting our kids to do particular movements repetitively, and we're taking away some of their other activities, which expose them to varied movement, which is important for development. So we need to be aware that that is a risk for injury. But I think definitely in basketball, it's a dynamic enough sport that as long as we do an appropriate program, we can make it not be a risk if they only play basketball. Okay? So the risk of injury in terms of specialization can also be countered by an argument that the earlier you specialize and the more you practice specific skills, the better you get at those skills. So it's just something to be aware of. Now, what can coaches do to modify load and better prepare athletes is a question. And one of the key things that we can do is we need to do a good warm-up, all right? And there is a mountain of evidence about how important and how good these neuromuscular warm-up programs are. So, old school warm-ups. Now, I'm old enough to know that my warm-up when I started playing footy was jog 2 laps and do some stretches. And our stretches were, quads, calf, hammy. All right, let's play. Okay. Now, in general, I would say that was the majority of most warm-ups at non-elite levels up until 5 or 10 years ago. And if we just went out and had a look at some domestic training, whether it's basketball at our club, hopefully at our club it's much better. I assume it's much better at our club. But at other clubs, at footy clubs, soccer clubs, tennis, that sort of thing, we will still see a lot of this stuff going on because of all of those concerns that we all share. We don't have enough time. We got to develop their skills. We've got to go through our team concepts. We've got so much stuff to get through. We don't have time for an appropriate warm-up. So jogging is good, all right? It does raise our core temperature. It raises our heart rate. It warms up our muscles, all of those sorts of things. But my argument is we can do a lot better in that time, all right? We can incorporate a lot of our other goals. Static stretching is a huge one. Now, I still give static stretches for people who are injured, all right? I'm taking some Zoom classes because we can't use our gym as much anymore. And I'll do static stretches in those classes, all right? But a lot of that is not to improve athletic performance and not to reduce the risk of injury, because there is now a large body of evidence that shows that static stretching does not have an impact on reducing injury rates, whether you do it before sport or after sport. And again, this is like even getting to know Andrew. This was one of the questions he asked of me was, what do you think about stretching after training? And I said, well, the evidence shows that it doesn't achieve a lot in terms of injury reduction. But I do think there are benefits of a team sitting down and doing some static stretching together, which are in terms of team culture, coming together after a loss and that sort of thing. I think there are better things that we could do, but it's not all negative. And I'm not saying throw it all away, okay? I'm just saying it won't reduce injury rate risk. And there's also there's a lot of evidence now that doing static stretching before doing athletic high-level athletic performance actually increases your risk of injury and decreases your performance. And that's across a whole heap of studies. So in general, don't do static stretches before you play or before you train as much as possible. Or if you do them, you then need to do some activation stuff, which is dynamic mobility and dynamic warm-up stuff. So that's our old school warm-ups, right? Now, this whole neuromuscular warm-up stuff is 20 years old, all right? So back in 2000 and 2001, a study was done in America, and they looked at huge numbers of high school and collegiate female soccer teams. And what they did was came up with this, what they called the PET program, which stands for Prevent Injury, Enhance Performance. And it was a very specific program that consisted of a warm-up, which was basically jogging activities, so jogging forwards, jogging backwards, going sideways, some strengthening exercises, some plyometrics, some agility drills, and you'll see at the end, stretching. So that was static stretching back then. And what they found, so what they did was they recruited 50 teams who they trained their coaches in how to run the program. And they got 50 teams to make that their warm-up. And the rules were you have to do this 2 or 3 times a week. It took 15 to 20 minutes. And those 50 teams did that program. And the other 100 teams that were randomly chosen did their normal warm-up. And at the end of both of those years, they collected the stats. All right. And the stats showed that in 2000, ACL injuries were reduced by 88% by doing that program compared to traditional warm-ups. And in the second year, it was 74%. All right. Now, one of the really interesting things, this is going away from basketball a bit, but one of the interesting things that other research has shown is that humans are very good at appreciating the suffering of an individual person. All right. So when I'm talking about this, I want you to think about the 4 athletes I showed you, Connor, or about an athlete you know, or a family member you know who had a horrible injury playing sport. All right. Just one person. That's all you need to think about. Because what we're really good at as humans is thinking about the suffering of an individual. We're not good at thinking about suffering on large scale. So these sorts of numbers are less likely to inspire people to change their behavior. And that goes across smoking. It goes across, so the big research is done in charitable donation based on seeing one starving kid versus seeing a family that's starving, or a village that's starving, or a nation that's starving, and seeing the figures. And what it shows is that humans will donate more when they're shown one person who suffered. All right. So we got to understand that. It's a really powerful tool to go, okay, what I'm going to do when I think about whether I'm going to do a warm up or not, I'm going to think about one person. All right. I'm going to think about, and it might be your favorite kid on the team for whatever reason. It might be a family member you know, or it might be one of our Wolves players. All right. Think about the cost they've had to pay because they went through a period of time where this stuff wasn't implemented. And let's not let our young athletes now have the same outcome. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. But we don't play soccer. All right. So this is the argument behind, well, yeah, that's soccer though. You know, that program was a soccer program. So I agree, we play something a lot better. All right. As I've said, I coached a couple of years of soccer. I've coached footy. I'm involved in footy, but basketball is my favorite sport for many reasons. So what happened was after coaching soccer, I had read this research through my physio work, and then I started coaching soccer, and I went, right, well, what I'm going to do is implement an appropriate warm-up for the kids. And because I did that for 2 years, and I saw it, so these were young kids. They were, 10, 11. And what I saw over the course of the season, we ran this program once a week and at games, so twice a week. And what I saw from the start of the season when we played teams to the end is by the end of the season, we outran, we were faster, we were stronger, we were more agile than any of the other teams. All right? Because we devoted 15 to 25 minutes of an hour and a half training session to doing this sort of stuff instead of working on important skills. All right? And when I say instead of, what you'll find is up-to-date neuromuscular warm-ups incorporate all the stuff you want to work on anyway. Okay? So we started doing it with the AFL under 12s 5 years ago, and we've run it every year since. And it's been amazing. The first 5 years I did the physio for the team. We had Osgood Slatters having kids taken out, unable to play whole games. We had Sever's disease. We had all sorts of stuff that impacted our ability to play through a week-long tournament. In the last 4 or 5 years, the only bad year we had was with concussion. Unfortunately, not a lot you can do with concussion. You get hit in the head, you're not allowed to play. Now, since then, I think netball came out first with their knee program, all right, which is exactly the same sort of thing. Soccer came out with this FIFA 11 plus. Then the Netball Australia came out with the knee program. And then the AFL have now come out with Footy First and with a whole lot of resources for coaches. All right. Basketball's still coming, obviously. So not only do these programs show reduced injury, but all the research since then, you can see all the things that have been shown to improve by undertaking these sorts of programs as well. So neuromuscular control, agility, stability, sprint speed, power, agility, proprioception. Now, I actually clipped, I just ran out of time. I was gonna kiss some Nixie butt, and I had clipped out from his talk, all the attributes, physical attributes we're trying to develop in players. All right. I'm giving you this as a tool to do exactly what Nixie wants our kids to do. Yeah. This is part of how we get them better. So, in the lead up to taking over the WolfPack physio job, and knowing that we had the state under 20 men program coming up, I rejigged what I'd been using for my wobble kids and came up with what we call the 2020 Empower Neuromuscular warm-up. Now, the important thing is just the warm-up has to have 5 components. It has to have some running stuff. It has to have dynamic mobility, which is how you improve range and activation of muscles. Has to have some agility work, has to have some strength work, and it has to have plyometric work. And the more I do, the more I find plyometrics is where it's at. Jumping and landing, hopping, changing direction at speed with velocity. And that's certainly a lot of what we do with these injured players as they come back. So this is where, instead of coming up with, well, how did I come up with this idea of I needed to do this, is I want to go back, and I'm actually going to ask questions of those of you in the group to talk about how would you approach each of those challenges. So if we're, as a group of coaches, we're committed to the process of coming to some adversity, recognizing that it's uncomfortable. How do we then look at it and come up with a solution based on the fact that we appreciate that a solution is going to help us and help our kids? Because it's all about, this is where I was going to kiss Andrew's butt, about being athlete-centered coaches. All right. We want the best for our athletes. All right. We know the physical and mental characteristics we want to develop in those athletes. I've now shown you the evidence that an appropriate neuromuscular warm-up program is a tool to use to help you achieve those goals. So I want to go back and go through our concerns. How do we manage them? So Nixie, do you want to go around just however they appear on your screen and maybe just address each of them? And I'll put in like afterwards what I've done in each instance as well.
So just ask each coach what.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Van, I'll go with you first. I'll unmute you.
Yeah, I think warm-up, it's a part of the game, but as Jason said, we wasted a lot of time on warm-ups. But thinking about warm-ups could be part of your training schedule as well, and make like example like a right-hand layup, left-hand layup as a warm-up part of your drills. And so this way you don't lose any skill time, and you just keep going.
Yep.
The different things. I like to change the warm-ups or even the drills. The basketball game is that different drills, not the same drills all the time, but got the same end result. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so that's essentially how I approach this too, is instead of saying, well, this is separate to everything else I'm trying to achieve, what I look at is how can I make it develop everything I want to develop. So a lot of the stuff we do with a ball in our hand. A lot of the running stuff, we don't just do running. We practice footwork that is essential for the game, all right? So who here has a team that their defensive slide is perfect or their closeout is perfect all the time? Like none of us, okay? So that becomes part of the warm-up. It is just something where they are practicing skills that they need to perfect in the game. And the really important thing is by making it sports specific, you also increase its protective effect, all right? So jogging has some injury prevention benefit, but you don't jog very often in a game. What you do is you do layups, or you do defensive footwork, or you change direction, or you pivot, or you do all of these movements that if we warm up and we do them at a lower level before we expect them to do it at 100% at full intensity, then we're practicing the skill and getting the fundamental movements down, getting that muscle memory. But in addition to that, you're also preventing injury. All right. So that's good, Van. Perfect.
So what I might do, so rather than opening it up to everyone, because we do have some time constraints, is that if anyone sort of has some thoughts about the points that are on the screen, just I can see you all, throw your hands up, and I'll throw to you guys. All right. So Scotty, yep. All right. There you go, mate.
Sorry, mate. Yeah, I reckon the warm-up side of things is really important. I think it allows us to get into training quicker instead of taking half an hour to get into training and get ourselves going. If we incorporate these warm-ups, especially if they're sport-specific, basketball-specific, and we get these with us as the girls, if we can get the girls to a point of being warm before we get into those drills, it stops us wasting time and in games. If we can warm up properly, instead of switching on by the end of the first quarter, we can switch on at the start of the game.
Yeah, so that's something I really liked with, well, in particular to start with, it was actually the women's team, but also the state 20s guys, just the energy they brought to the warm-up, being that next level up of professional athletes. And it does. It sparks up talk. It sparks up those things that left energy so you don't go onto court lazy and, wait to fire up. So what about this? One of the ones I really want to ask you about is feeling it's outside your knowledge base. Now, just looking around, I know, Scotty, you've dealt with this a little bit, all right, with Fraser as well. Because what they did was they came and asked me to take them through it. All right. So what would you do if you didn't know how to defend a screen at under 12s or something like that? Like they're the questions. So I want you to look at this like you would look at a basketball program, a basketball problem, which is, okay, I've got a problem. Well, what I would do is I'd use my network, or I'd go to YouTube, or I'd, whatever you do. And I would address the problem and come up with a solution, because I understand that it's an important part of what we're doing. All right. So if you feel it's outside your knowledge base, I would encourage you, use the resources available. Come and have a chat to me. A lot of the assistants at WABL level have been in programs where they've done this as well. So their resources, our other coaches, Nixie and Andrew and Fraser, they've all been around this. So the knowledge is out there. What I've said in a later one is we have resources. So I have a written up program. We have video footage, though I couldn't find my video footage, but Fraser has it all of the men doing it, of the state team doing it, of some of the variations that are out there. And I'm more than happy to come and take your team through it if that's what you want.
I just wanted to say, Jase, just with regards to these warm-ups, probably the most important thing from a coaching perspective is that you embrace the idea of doing these warm-ups. You do your best to understand the warm-ups, and then if you believe in it and if you sell it to your players, like with the women's SBL group, they'll bring that energy, they'll put the effort in, they'll execute the drills the right way, and then it becomes habit. So every session we know we need to be ready at this time. We do our dynamic warm-up that Jason obviously runs for us. But the girls are at a stage now where if Jason's running late, they get in and they can run it themselves because they've all bought in. But it's coach-driven. If you guys don't believe in it and your players can see that you don't believe in it, the players won't as well. So, yeah, that was just my added point on top of that.
And that's why I love that the SBL team, the women's SBL team, they're all doing the same program. So the kids see them doing it. It's not like it's this weird thing that just one coach is now doing. This is becoming a club-wide thing, and it will definitely become a sport-wide thing very, very quickly. So we should be at the forefront of it, I think. There's also lots of clips on YouTube of the activation sort of stuff that the heroes of these kids are doing. All right. So I'll often talk about NBA 2K and developing your players in NBA 2K to younger kids because they get that idea. But also there are clips of LeBron, doing workouts where he does this sort of stuff. You can see him before a game standing on Duradiscs, which are like wobble boards, catching passes to the side and passing them back. It's all stuff that is being done at the highest level, which makes it a lot easier when the kids see that to then go, okay, I want to be like that too. So that's just a picture of what the drawn up program looks like. All right. So I just drew it up on Fast Draw on the play drawing software. So that's one way to, just to have a reminder with you in your coaching bag or whatever that you can do. So just email me, and I'm happy to send that out. As I said, there's video footage. The one thing I would say is come up with some key language that you use, just like you use key language for, taking a shot. So focusing on your release or getting low in defensive stance, keep your butt down, get wide, all of those sorts of key language things that you guys all have your own and your teams will understand them. In our warm-up, we talk about quality of movement. So the keys that I use are exaggerated perfection. So when we're doing our warm-up, it's not 100% intensity. It's you've got to look like you're doing the skill perfectly. You're practicing that movement. And the other things are like a ninja, so landing like a ninja, so you're silent, you're soft, or like a gazelle. So it's whatever you use, it's whatever works. All right. Final slide I just thought I'd put up is some research I saw the other day in reference to what's going to happen in elite sport and in sport in general after a COVID-19 lockdown. All right. So what that research showed was that after the NFL lockout in 2011, I imagine it was a salary dispute. So the top figure is about Achilles ruptures, all right, averaged out over a series of years. So they're the average number of Achilles ruptures that happen during a season across the NFL. In 2011, there was a lockout that you can see that big black line. Now, in that lockout, all of the players didn't have access to their team strength and conditioning coaches, to their coaches, to... Now, I assume they're elite athletes. They probably would have done something, right? You would think. I don't know. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps that's the reason. But essentially, not engaging in their injury prevention strategies for that period of time meant that when they came back in pre-season, after, what's that, 4.5, 5 months off, they saw that many Achilles ruptures instead, all right? In addition to a couple that happened back here. So that is what potentially, now this is probably more, I imagine it will be more of concern to adults, all right? So to our elite level teams, that we've got to be really concerned about what our athletes have been doing during lockdown. Because if they haven't been ramping up their work rate as they return to sport, and all of a sudden we're allowed to train and then we're allowed to play, and of course as coaches we go, well, we've got to get them ready, we've got to train how we want to play, and the load is just going to skyrocket, that is when injuries happen, all right? Again, this is just food for thought, and to understand that this is a storm waiting to happen because of the reduced load we've had for an extended period of time, and potentially a really quick period of time when we're going to try and get our teams ready, which just makes our injury management strategies, our load management really, really important. Okay. Yeah. So I thought I'd leave you with that one, and we're done.
Awesome. Great work. Scotty did have a question just regarding when these warm-ups will happen. So obviously we do them pre-training before training starts. And I know with the WSBL group, we're doing them pre-game as well. But you did mention that you do them once or twice a week. Is there specific times when they need to be done?
No. So in general, what I do with my WABL team is I'll do it at training, and we do a very reduced version pre-game. And I find, it's great for warming them up, but it's also part of that routine. The routine of, you know, we are a team. This is the uniform way we prepare before every game. And they are practicing skills. That's the other thing you really need to understand. This isn't just, you know, hopping around doing ballet bullshit, Andrew calls it. This is practicing your skills and warming your body and your brain up, ready to perform at your best. And all of the evidence shows that's what happens. So in general, they're the 2 times I do with my team, and I don't ask them to do any more, but I do run, like our business runs a sports-specific rehab session once a week up at HBF. We used to run it at HBF and at ECU before that. And in that, we do a full version, so a 25, 30-minute version of the program, and then we do high-intensity interval training stuff as well. So that's an option that's available if any of your athletes are keen. But in general, just teaching them the importance of the process, the importance of developing attributes apart from their jump shot. So the speed, the agility, the endurance, the strength. And again, I'll come back, and probably the girls don't play it as much, but the boys play NBA 2K all the time. And when you've got, does anyone here play NBA 2K? Yeah. So just ask your kids, do you play NBA 2K? They're players, so they create a my player, and they have attributes: speed, agility, strength, size, all the sort of physical attributes you expect athletes to have. And they have to train those attributes as well as other attributes. All right. So I find that gets huge buy-in for under 12s, under 14s. But yeah, it's up to you how you're going to get that. But it's it's the importance of teaching your athletes self-efficacy and teaching them the things they need to know to help them develop the most.